CBS News projects Virginia voters have approved a new congressional map favoring Democratic House seats in the state. Here's a look at the results, with approval gaining roughly 51% of the vote. So this was close. It is a major blow for Republicans in a nationwide redistricting battle. The new map would give Democrats an advantage in 10 House districts and just leave one safe Republican seat. So to discuss this all, let's bring in CBS News election law expert and contributor David Becker and CBS News political director Finn Gómez. Thank you so much for joining us. Finn, let's start with you. So this outcome is really tight with only basically a 3 percentage point difference. What happened here?
Well, look, Adriana, polls leading up to the race showed a tight race. A Washington Post poll earlier this month basically predicted the outcome here. And the end results show that Virginia is more of a purple state than, say, Texas and California, who also made significant changes to their congressional maps, which was actually part of the Republicans' argument leading into Election Day. But ultimately, Democrats were more mobilized. They had an organized effort with big-name surrogates like former President Barack Obama, Governor Wes Moore of Maryland, California Governor Gavin Newsom, and other big political heavy hitters. And also Virginia Democrats I spoke to, Adriana, and this is important, also say their tactics changed. At the beginning of their campaign to change the congressional maps in Virginia, Democrats did not really focus as much on President Trump, who has been underwater in most national polls. Towards the end, though, they changed their strategy to have this election become more of a referendum on the president's job performance, and you saw that in their ads. Both sides spent big, over $80 million in ads. But Republicans were far outspent in this race. But it was not a blowout, and that's important. A 3-point margin in the state, Kamala Harris carried by almost 6. Republicans are taking that as a big sign that they can be competitive, especially in statewide races. But they do wish, and I did speak to a Virginia Republican leader, they do wish that the national Republicans invested more in this race. So there was some criticism that I heard from Virginia Republicans that they wish there was just more from the National Party in this tight race. But it's something that ultimately gives Democrats an advantage leading into the midterms.
David, and Finn, you'll know this too, but we did a lot of stories here at CBS News when Republicans launched a similar effort in the state of Texas. Help people understand explain the difference between how Republicans were able to change the map in that state versus how it was done in the state of Virginia. And is this the new norm? I know now that Republicans are looking to the state of Florida and Governor Ron DeSantis to do something similar in that state to bring about another change in the way that the state is districted. Just give us an overview from a bird's eye.
Yeah, I mean, so you're quite right. I mean, there's different how different states have approached this. There have been states largely led by Democrats that had moved over the last couple decades towards more redistricting commissions, nonpartisan redistricting to avoid partisan gerrymandering. And so states like Virginia and California had constitutional provisions that required that, and it required the voters to go to the polls to bypass those constitutional protections just for this 1 or 2 election cycles. Both states intend to go back to those nonpartisan redistricting commissions for 2030. Texas did it purely politically. They were allowed to do partisan gerrymandering under their state laws. But remember, this all began with the president pressuring Texas to create more districts that were perceived to be friendly to Republicans. And this is very, very rare. Mid-decade redistrictings, voluntary mid-decade redistrictings, not court-ordered mid-decade redistrictings, are extremely rare. It's only happened about 3 times in the last half a century before this year. And this year, it's already happened 6 times. And that's going to create a lot of confusion for voters, a lot of extra work for election officials. But Democrats will say that they perceive this to be necessary as a result of the president pressuring Texas, which was the first state to proceed with this mid-decade redistricting.
I mean, it really does feel like politics at its most unsavory, going in between, the 10-year marks when these maps are supposed to be drawn to redraw the lines. But I wonder, does this reflect then a manufactured political will in these states, or is it a more current reflection of the people's will if they're in large part going and voting to approve these new maps?
Well, I mean, I think there's different messages that can be taken here. I mean, again, in many of the states like Texas, this was the legislature that acted. We never heard from the people who are really affected by this, the voters. We might hear from them this coming year when they get to vote for the state legislature. In California, the ballot measure to approve this redistricting passed overwhelmingly, much closer than by a much wider margin than Virginia. It passed by about 64% to 36%. So I think there are mixed messages here. I don't know that there's any long-term intention. I think this doesn't serve anybody. There are going to be millions of Americans who find themselves in new congressional districts with new choices for representatives. These are people who are, by their name, supposed to represent these individuals. And they're going to be confused about who's representing them as this political warfare is going on between the parties.
And quickly, what's the final tally then after all of this redistricting? What do we expect to be the final result? Has it all evened out?
You know, I think we're going to have to wait and see. One of the things about these redistrictings is they're all based on previous election cycles, all based on previous voting patterns. And it's going to be really difficult if this turns out to be somewhat of a wave election for the party who is not holding the White House, which is very common in the first midterm after a new president takes office. Then we could see all of these bets go out the window. So I think it's going to be very difficult to predict what's going to happen. Right now, it looks based on past voting behavior, as it's pretty close to being even. I'd be interested to hear what Finn has to say about that. But that's I think November is going to tell us a lot, and it might not be what's expected.
All right, David Becker. Sorry, Finn.
No, I was just going to say, really, we have to really look at the next chapter here is going to be Florida and that special legislative session that the governor in the state, Governor DeSantis, called for. I really do think that is going to be really significant here as we proceed forward into this cycle.
Yeah, and I know that some Republicans are hoping that Governor Young that Glenn Young can try to challenge this in court, but even the most optimistic Republicans aren't feeling that their chances are good there. We'll keep following this, of course. David Becker, Finn Gómez, we thank you both as always.